side of thing. There we go. Okay, so I will call to order our Planning Commission meeting of January 18th, 2024. Happy New Year to everyone. It's great to see you. I'm glad everybody made it through the treacherous weather we've had outside. Can I call for a roll call?
Commissioner Nolan,
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Present.
Commissioner Geiger,
Here.
Commissioner Gable, Commissioner Briles,
Here.
Commissioner Burunda. He did say he will be a bit late, and then lastly, Commissioner Abrams. Cynthia? I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Alan? Okay.
Okay, well, we will continue forward. So approval of minutes. So your packet that was online and available should have minutes. I'd ask were there, hopefully folks got a chance to review those. Were there any changes to the minutes? Okay, not hearing any. I could wait online. So can I have a motion to accept the minutes?
This is Dave Hamilton. I make a motion to accept the minutes of our last meeting. They were sent out beforehand.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, okay, they are approved. Okay, so that moves us forward to our hearing, which is a public hearing on the amendment to the Mill Creek Municipal Code 17-20-020 and a planning commission resolution that was included, a draft resolution, and I will turn it over to the planning team.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Just going to pull up a few brief slides I have. All right, so we have a fairly minor amendment to our business park secondary uses proposed. So currently, there are 3 allowed uses in the business park zone, and we would like to add a 4th set of uses here, which would add commercial kennels, pet stores, and pet grooming facilities. So why would we do this? The city has received over time interest in locating pet related businesses in the business park zone. And currently we would have to say, no, you can't do that here. However, we thought, why not? Why not allow it? There's several vacancies in some of the buildings there that could be filled by these businesses. And we thought, well, if we allow it as a secondary use, you would still have to have a principal use, you know, a business, or say a industrial use, or an office use, or healthcare, well, no principal uses, but as a secondary use, why not allow these in the other spaces that are available? Also, it could be harder to cite things like commercial kennels because they're not always the best neighbors, but a business park zone, you're not going to set any, you know, people trying to sleep at night because there's dogs barking, you know. So we thought these would be some great uses. I think they would fit fairly seamlessly into the business park zone, and they would, you know, allow people to move into these spaces that we have and hopefully fill some vacancies.
Can you refresh us just on generally where the business park zone is?
Sure. So it's in the south end of the city. Don't have a map. I have a map over
Just
here.
your.
It's down here in this little section that kind of jumps out at the bottom. There's a lot of unused properties down there that aren't developed fully. And it's not surrounded by residential. It's either surrounded by community business to the north, or I guess there is some residential to the west, but it's separated by wetlands.
Yeah. Yep. So commission questions, concerns? No, yeah, seemed like a good, strong staff recommendation, and I know that in Everett, they've successfully dealt with the details of, you know, making kennels good neighbors, and so I I'm sure staff can do that with that. Does anyone, so we haven't attached to our package a motion.
We have to have a hearing,
Well, that's true. I need to open up the hearing. You're right. Thank you, Dave.
just in case.
So at this point, if there's no questions here, we will open the hearing. Do we have any written comments from any?
No written comments received.
Okay, do we have anyone in the audience today in the building interested in providing? Okay, so then we will go to online. Do we have anyone who's interested in providing comments to us? Not hearing any. I will close the hearing.
I think we've got a hand raised.
Oh, do we? Oh, good.
Might need to put it in gallery. view.
Hi, yeah, I am a representative of LJB Mill Creek. We are one of the companies that has businesses in the business park zone, and we are in favor of this request.
Oh, thank you. And can I get your name too? Just have it for the
My
record.
name's Kellyanne Armstrong.
Okay. No, thank you.
Kellyanne, what is your address, please?
The address for the businesses we have is 16717 9th Avenue Southeast in Mill Creek.
Okay. Is there anyone else who'd like online? Because we have no one in the room here. No, and thank you so much, Kelly, for calling in. With that, then I will close the hearing, having heard from the public. Commission, any additional concerns or questions since we've now heard? Okay, so then I would entertain a motion to adopt the resolution as proposed in our packet.
So this is Dave Hamilton. I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution recommending approval to the Mill Creek City Council of an amendment to the Mill Creek Municipal Code, section 17.20.020, secondary uses.
I would like to second that motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. So then we move forward from hearing to briefing and discussion.
So Sybil, did you record that we have another member here?
All right, not yet, but I did take note on my minute to take in that Brunda did get here at 6:03. Okay, so next on our agenda is a presentation from Chris Collier. So if you, the old commissioner members will remember, Chris Collier gave a presentation to the planning commission commissioners last year, about a couple of months ago. He's back again because there are some really good questions that you guys are asking staff, and we think that Chris is much capable answering those questions. So Chris is a program manager at Snohomish County Housing Authority. And with that, Chris, you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, everybody, that I can't be there in person tonight. Due to the joy of children, I am sick and the revolving carousel of disease that comes with the winter months. So again, I wish I could be there in person, but hopefully this does the job. So this presentation is to kind of give you the basis for where Mill Creek and the region are at with regard to housing and housing affordability, and to start the discussion, help facilitate the discussion around the comprehensive plan, and then open it up for questions. So I will stay here as long as you want. If you want to jump in with questions or save until the end, I will leave that to your whatever you guys do or whatever you prefer to do. So, but I don't mind interrupting. Can you see my screen okay on your end?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'll try to keep this to a few minutes, or 20 minutes or so. And here we go. So again, my name is Chris Collier, Program Manager for the Alliance. What the Alliance is, it is inside the Housing Authority, but it is a discrete entity. It is an interlocal agreement between the cities and the county and the Housing Authority. Mill Creek is included as a member. Listed here, I cover pretty much the entire county except Index, Gold Bar, Sultan, Bothell, and Briar. And my job is to support all of the cities and their communities in understanding and responding to housing unaffordability. Step one in understanding is, well, in responding is understanding. So this presentation is really hitting on that understanding piece. And the responding is I can talk about in questions. What is the problem? Let's start with understanding. The problem in one slide, in one snippet, is how many homes do we have? How many people are trying to occupy those homes? Starting in 2000, I counted the number of new households created in Snohomish County. This is Mill Creek is in here. New households created and new housing units created in every single year. 2003, we built 1,100 more units in Snohomish County than households were created in that year. So unsold or unrented unit in 2003 doesn't get knocked over in 2004. It adds up into a surplus of housing, which is shown in this blue bar. So by 2003, again, if we start counting in the year 2000, that number is 6,400 surplus housing units. So we've got plenty of choices to go around. But something really interesting happens in 2015. Interesting, maybe grim. 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, we continue to have a deficit of housing unit production relative to new households. Lots more households are being established in Snohomish County than housing units, to the point that in 2019 we're functionally out of housing. We've recovered since then, but this figure includes rentals. So that's a little hard to separate out how much of this is rental unit creation and how much of this is ownership. In any case, we have about 4,000 surplus units today, estimated. And what is the scarcity that I'm showing here done to price? The scarcity, there we go. This brown line is the median sale price for a single family detached home in all of Snohomish County. So this is from Stanwood to Mill Creek to Edmonds and all points in between. This is the inflation adjusted, I should say, sale price for a single family detached home only. So we peaked in 2022 at just shy of $800,000 is the median price, not the average. Now, most households don't do an all cash purchase, and so they need bank financing. So let's assume some loan terms like a 10% down payment, a 30-year term, and the real annual interest rates, according to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. This is the required income. Oops, there we go. The required income in Snohomish County for this median house jumped up to $168,000 of required household income in 2022 due to interest rates rising, as you might recall, from about 2.2% to almost 7% at the height of 2022. They've come down a bit since then, but still required incomes are high, the highest they've ever been. So this yellow line is really what we should be looking at when we talk about housing affordability or attainability in the context of ownership housing. And this is single family detached homes, and it rolls downhill from here to condominiums and townhomes, which are a similar story. So this line says you must be this tall to ride. You have to have this much money to be able to own a house in Snohomish County at the median. So if we know how tall we need to be, financially speaking, how tall are we is the obvious next question. This purple line, again, adjusted for inflation, is how tall the average or median household is in Snohomish County. Median household includes a single person living alone, roommates, married couple with or without kids. It's all types of households. And the median household in Snohomish County does not make enough. Adjusted for inflation, the recession kind of screws with this a little bit as required incomes and housing stock fluctuates, but the average is the median households has been close-ish, but that is no longer the case. After 2021, the median household is way out, like single family detached housing is out of the league for the median household in Snohomish County. Like I said, it rolls downhill from here and it continues into rental housing. What has the rental market done against this backdrop of scarcity starting in 2015? This green line just superimposed, this is two graphs sitting on top of each other, but so you can see how things have changed on a percentage basis over time. Rent stayed flat if you adjust for inflation until 2013, and then it takes off in 2014, 15, 16, and onward. Adjusted for inflation, rent has risen by over 70% in Snohomish County. With local variance, rent has risen by over 70% in the last 7 to 8 years. We're now looking at about $2,100 a month to rent something somewhere in Snohomish County. Again, local variance is at play, and I'll cover that in a few slides. So this is the story. This is in one slide. Single family homes are way unaffordable. It goes down to townhomes and condominiums, and rent continues to rise faster than the median household income. So let's look at this in a little more detail. In Southwest Snohomish County,
I
You
think we've
see-
got a question for you,
Yeah,
Chris.
can I make
Oh,
a comment on your slide you just
apologize.
had up? I guess
Yes.
it, to me, it's extremely interesting that that purple line was just under $200,000 20 years ago. And it's only gone up 10%. That's, the wages haven't kept track with inflation at all. That's a really big eye opener for me.
Indeed, it's something that really bummed me out when I updated this for the 2022 median household income, that it actually adjusted for inflation went down. That's that's kind of putting some salt on the wound there. When the median household income goes down, required incomes for housing are going up. We're in a pretty tough spot. Just if
Your one slide,
if you-
what's the problem? That shows it pretty well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. So to put a little finer point on it, city by city, let's look at, on the table, we have the sale price for a single family detached home on the top of the table, and townhomes and condos together. In the city of Edmonds, you see $1 million for a single family home in 2022. This is at the height of prices. And I don't have full data for 2023 yet, so I didn't want to give an inaccurate comparison. 525 for townhomes and condos. Given the loan terms I mentioned earlier, 10% down, 30-year term, and so on, you see the required income over the city of Edmonds on the map in the bottom left corner. $208,000 to play in the city of Edmonds in single family housing. Required household income. City of Linwood, a little more affordable. Mount Lake Terrace, Mill Creek at 1.1. That was the high watermark for Mill Creek. You're now at 925 at year end 2023 or so. Still waiting on December. Mukilteo, our third alliance city at over 1 million. Bothell was as well. City of Everett. Oh, there's Bothell. Oops. And City of Snohomish. So this is a lot of numbers. There's a lot to look at and consider here. So this will be sent out, or this has been sent out as a PDF for you. So please feel free to take a look at that in more detail. But this is the first half of the previous slide. This is the cost and the required income. You must be this tall to ride line for these cities. Now let's look at who makes what, not by the number of people, but by occupations that you as a city council or planning commission and city council might seek to have or consider good neighbors in your city. So I'm looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They look at the Central Puget Sound region, Snohomish, King, and Pierce County, which I think is appropriate because if you work in King County but can't afford to live there, you'll probably look at Snohomish County or Pierce County. So some of these people, most of these people probably work in King County, but can they live here in Snohomish County? Looking at 25th percentile, 50th, and 75th percentile of income, kind of beginning, middle, end of career income for a dentist. The profession of general dentistry affords you, as an occupation, about $100,000 to $193,000 a year over the course of your career, depending on, beginning, middle, end of your career. Right out of the gate, if you're looking at median income, a general dentist is no longer able to buy the median house in Southwest Snohomish County. The only exception is Mill Creek, Mount Lake Terrace, slip of the tongue, just barely. Dentists make good neighbors. Right? If you're telling someone that, hey, you're going to have a new neighbor, you get to pick their profession, or you get to pick from this list, general dentists would not be the one they say, nah, I don't want that one, right? Unless they have really bad teeth or something. I don't know. Database administrators or judges and magistrates. So database administrators as kind of the tech sector in King County, judges and magistrates, because what would you say if your kids called you or you called your parents and said, Mom, Dad, I'm a judge. I'm a magistrate. I was just appointed to the position. Hooray. Would your response be try getting a real job? Because you can't afford anything but a townhome or condo in Southwest Snohomish County, right? When you're a judge or magistrate, the cultural expectation is that you should be able to live basically anywhere. But that's no longer the case for the median house. And by the way, these loan terms do not include student debt, which a judge or a dentist might still be carrying and make their circumstances that much more difficult. Not because there's a lot of judges or magistrates, didn't put that on for this reason, but only because that's where we're at, right? Think about the life-altering impact it will have on a kid's life if they get to play with Judge Smith's kids, right? If you're their neighbor, if they're in your neighborhood, and you get to go hang out at the judge's house and learn in that very low stress environment about their profession, that can have a truly life-altering impact, but that's no longer possible today. If they're not already your neighbor, It probably won't be. Accountants and auditors. If you don't know a judge, which is fair, you might know an accountant or an auditor who, as a profession, make between $69,000 and $102,000. But Linwood and Everett are available for them to live in. They should just go live there. Fine. Problem, only 353 townhomes or condos sold in Everett and Linwood combined in 2022. Total. And there were 21,600 accountants and auditors in the year previous. That's a typo. That should actually say 2022. This is just one profession. 21,000 accountants and auditors. Many of them are already housed. Many of them already own their homes. But for those that don't, if you're trying to attract new accountants or auditors out of school from other parts of the country, this is their reality, is that this is just their profession, and they are, even in that small scope, there's fierce competition for these townhomes and condos. No wonder prices are rising. What about renting? Like I said earlier, average rent adjusted for inflation was net zero between 2000 and 2013. 2013 to 2022, it rises by 71%. 2023 rents have cooled off a little bit. They're not galloping northward as fast, but city by city is a different story. So here we have the city of Edmonds circled in red, and you can see 2022 average for the month in, Edmonds August average in 2022 and the Edmonds August average in 2023. How much has Edmonds changed August to August? About 12%. And you can see most of that comes from 1 beds and 2 beds in the city of Edmonds. If you bought your house in Edmonds, the median single family house, given the loan terms I've kept quoting, if you bought your house before 2013-14 in Edmonds, you probably pay less per month than a 3-bedroom renter in the city. So anytime before 2013, you're probably paying less per month. Mountlake Terrace, 33% increase in 3-bedroom apartments. That's notable. And people that bought their homes in Mountlake Terrace before 2020 are probably paying less per month than a 3-bedroom renter. So when we talk about, as a community, or as we think about the push-pull or the benefits, between renting and owning, we might say, well, yes, renting, you don't get the equity back, but you probably pay less per month than a homeowner, right? That's increasingly not the case. City of Bothell, a more expensive city, so it's, we go further back. 2015, before then, you're probably paying less than a 3-bedroom renter in the city of Bothell. City of Linwood, 2017, and you can see a 2-bed is going for about $2,600 a month in Linwood. That's Linwood addresses, not strictly within the city limits. $2,100 for a 1-bed apartment in the city of Linwood. City of Everett, prices have come down, but for 2- and 3-bedroom apartments in Everett. And if you bought your house before 2021 in Everett, you're probably paying less than a 3-bedroom renter does today. That's stark. In the city of Mill Creek, you can see what your rent has done. 1 and 2 beds are up, 3 beds are down a little bit. And this is the only city in Southwest Snohomish County where it's never been more affordable yet to own a single family house relative to a 3-bedroom apartment. That's the one exception that I found so far. Again, a lot of numbers. This is all in the PDF if you want to look over it in more detail. So enter affordable housing. Right? What the picture I painted so far is that the private market is struggling very, very much to reach even people, at the level of database administrator, dentist, judge, magistrate. If you're below that, which is a lot of people, as I'll show, you're looking for affordable housing. You're likely qualifying anyway for affordable housing. Qualifying in this case, I set at $58,250 a year for a household of 3 people. That's the county average household size. And according to HUD in 2022, very low income is $58,250 or less. Doesn't matter if it's 2 adults, 1 adult, 2 kids, and just 3 people, period. That describes 68,458 households in Snohomish County. 68,000 households times 3 to get the number of people. So that's our qualifying just very low income. That's below 50% of AMI, if you're familiar with the area median income term. How many of these households can we help in Snohomish County? The Housing Authority of Snohomish County in blue can assist about 6,200 of them between their 4,000 or so Section 8 vouchers or other types of voucher assistance, and their 2,000 or so income restricted housing units that the Housing Authority owns and operates. The Everett Housing Authority can assist another 3,700 or so. And other income restricted housing, subtracting out HASCO and EHA's portions, covers another 17%, 11,000 units or so. And that's it. To the best of my knowledge, this is all of the income restricted housing assistance we have in Snohomish County. Something I acknowledge here is that a lot of these units are assisting people at 60% of AMI or 80% of the area median income. So I'm probably overestimating the number of people, the number of units of assistance we have for people at 50% or below due to that. But even then, it's bad enough even when I overestimate what we have. We're leaving 70% of our qualifying very low income households to figure it out every night. What that means for most of them is that they're severely cost burdened. They pay 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of their income to rent every month. That is the of Snohomish County renters, severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% per month, is the by far almost double the largest group of renters in Snohomish County. So if you're a renter, there's probably a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 chance that you pay more than 50% of your rent income to month income to rent every month. Ooh, being sick and presenting is no good. Other people, how they figured out is, in the case of Darrington, this is a story I heard from up north, they're living in a tent in someone's backyard. That's where they live, is they live in a tent in a friend's backyard, an acquaintance. They run an extension cord out to the tent, and that's their home. They might also be car camping. They might also be doubled up or overcrowded, or they're somewhere on the way to being visibly street homeless. You know, this cohort of 47,000 households, you know, they are increasingly exposed to an unexpected financial shock that will push them into that spiral into homelessness. Car breaks down, car needs new tires, job loss, death in the family, illness, on-the-job injury, can't work, you know, divorce, pick your reason, pick your precipitating event. These households are particularly vulnerable to those things that would get them on that track. Who's affordable housing for? More occupations, again, for the 3-county region. It's your preschool teachers, your childcare workers, vet techs, school bus drivers, commercial airline pilots, massage therapists, industrial mechanics. All of these professions are making way less per month than they need to afford rent on a single income in Snohomish County. Again, somewhere in the county. So this is a selection of over 1.2 million workers whose job at the median makes less than $80,000 a year. It's from over 440 different occupations. And the reason I put these 2 points up is to say, I don't accept the argument that I hear sometimes of this is just moral failing, you know, grumble, grumble, bootstraps. You can't say that to 1.2 million employed people and expect and be taken seriously. This is much more systemic and much more broad than saying you individually just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And by the way, you might know people who are described as low income. So this table on the bottom is HUD's guidance in 2022 for low, very low, and extremely low income. Let's take household of two people in the family. If you make $80,750 a year net as a family, net, or actually it might be gross, you're low income. If you make below 54, sorry, this is 2023 figures since that was available. If you make 54,800, you're very low income. You might know somebody that is described by these figures based on the number of people in their household and the total household income. Surprise, being low income reaches much higher into society than we expect or normally think of. Employees by occupational median income. I've kept talking about number of people and jobs and all that stuff. So now here's the biggest picture that I can give you. 3-county region, 2022. How many people work in a job where their median income in the career that they work in is over $240,000? 8,900 people. Good for them. The next band down, 215 to 240, only 520 people. Next band, 192 to 215. If you stick with your job in the middle of your career, you can expect to make about in this range, 1,100 people. Right now you're wondering, Chris, why is the y-axis on this graph so tall? Not tall yet. It's not tall yet. It's because 900,000 people work in a job where they either made or will expect to make $53,000 a year or less in their occupation. There's local variance, King County workers, King County bus driver probably pays more than a Snohomish County bus driver, but still, this is the occupational range that you're looking at. So this is the you must be this tall to ride line for single family homes, townhomes, condos, and apartments in Snohomish County. Looking at any ownership product, townhome, single family, condo, 15.8% of the region's workforce could afford to buy in Snohomish County on a single income in the middle of their career. If you only look at single family homes, that's 9%. I I struggled with whether to show all ownership products or just single family, and went with the former because 9% just seems unrealistic. How can that be that only 9% of the region's workforce could afford to buy a house on a single income in the middle of their career? Remember, 28% of the region's workforce, 556,000 people, could afford on a single income an apartment, some apartment from a studio to a 3, somewhere in Snohomish County, Edmonds to Stanwood. And 72% or 1.4 million people could do neither of those things in the middle of their career on a single income. But Chris, I have been challenged with, what about dual income households? Which is fair. An increasing number of households are dual income out of necessity. But a barista normally won't marry a doctor. That pairing of vastly unequal incomes is very rare. So let's assume that people basically get a roommate or marry for housing in their approximate income band. 2 people from that $53,000 a year or less group are only going to be able to rent for their whole life. That's the greatest that they can hope for, is to be renters, affordable renters, but still renters. And think about how important it is to build up equity in your house as both a retirement vehicle and just a financial vehicle in the American household. They're not going to be able to do that. And this number grows every single day as prices rise. So this is what I'm showing here is people that are renters by necessity, not by choice. I want to specify or emphasize that I was a renter by choice for a long, long time, over 10 years. As I graduated during the recession, I chased work all over the country and the world, in fact, looking to find stable employment. In the wake of the recession, I needed to be a renter because I needed that mobility. But once I didn't want to be a renter, if I was not able to buy a house, then I'm incurring, kind of a ephemeral debt or loss of equity in my house relative to my homeowning peers. And it's really hard to figure out how you can ever recover from that except by luck. And so this is something that's going to be with us for a long, long time because all of the deferred equity or lost equity that these renters by necessity are accruing, they won't really be able to make back. This is a problem. So how this manifests, for example, one of many, many, many ways that this can manifest is the number of people who are in your workforce and also live in your city. Think about this in the context of road congestion. Does traffic piss you off? Yes. Think about the number of people that are commuting to work in your city. So pick your favorite city, of course, Mill Creek, right there just to the right of center. In 2002, about 6-7% of Mill Creek's workforce lived in town. About 27-28% of Marysville's workforce lived in town. By 2019, skipping ahead, that number in Mill Creek drops to below 5%, about 4% of Mill Creek's workforce now lives in the city. The workforce grew, but the percentage of the workforce that lived in town shrank. 2020, 2021. You can see that in most cities, less and less of the city's workforce lives in town and is commuting. In many of these cities that I've studied in more detail, way too nerdy to put on the screen tonight, is most of that growth in the workforce is coming from over 50 miles away. And we don't really drive east or west, certainly not west very far in Western Washington. So that's a lot of I-5 trips, and I-5 is not getting wider, right? 405 isn't getting a heck of a lot wider. So the 2002 average was about 14 or 13.5% of the average city's workforce lived in town. By 2021, that average drops to just over 10%, 10 and change. So if you care about transit because you're grumpy about traffic, this is bad. If you care about the environment because you dislike the idea of people driving single occupancy vehicles further and further and further just to get to and from work and emitting greenhouse gas emissions, this should also upset you, right? If you're upset because your workers don't arrive to work reliably on time because traffic is snarled, this should also upset you, right? There's many reasons to care about this, about housing, even if that's not your priority issue. So closing in on the end of my presentation, sorry for banging on a little long. Do we want to do all market solution? Do we want to do all subsidy? Should we just dump all our money into the housing authority's budget? Should we just, cut loose on market? Kind of both. The market side, taking that first, has kind of dual impacts. A study from the Upjohn Institute of Employment Research in Michigan found that for every 100 new market rate units that you create, regardless of the price, just 100 new market rate units, the next income quintile down, people will be able to upgrade their housing. So you build a new house. Someone that owns a house now cashes out that equity, moves into the new house. Someone buys that house, maybe a first-time home buyer who buys that older house. Whatever unit they left, that 45 to 70 households left, someone else further down the chain gets to upgrade as well. And this all happens within about 5 years. So for every 100 new market rate units you create, this happens. So there's a great benefit both in the market side, downstream into income restricted housing, or lower income households, I should say. But still, we can do both. Cities in particular have a lot of the keys to supporting income restricted housing and market housing, actually. As the city really sits at the nexus of all that, between your comp plan, your zoning map, and the opportunity to pass and adopt incentives and outreach, something that, as I've talked with Mountain Lake Terrace this morning about their comp plan, Stanwood yesterday, and the city of Snohomish in months past, it's a lot of outreach and laying out a sign in your city that says, we will be an active partner because we want to address this issue through you, the builder, doing the work that you do, whether they're private market or income restricted, nonprofits, so on and so forth. We really can do both of these things. I absolutely believe that a city and as a society, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But the city and the planning commission really has the keys to whether we do or don't. And just in closing, one more slide to go, I think. Recognize this moment for what it is, that things are really different now, right? You go back to the problem in one slide, 20 years of history or 15 years of history and much more, things kind of bump along at kind of a steady pace. And now things are different. There's a clear before and after point that we have passed. And so we have to recognize that we're in a different time. We have to act like it. So we have to recognize that there is a generational shift happening that wanted to happen a long time ago in urban design. It's demanded by circumstance and your current and future residents. If you hear from current residents that say housing is a priority of mine, which was found in a regional and statewide survey in 2022, that housing is the top issue in Washingtonians' minds, recognize it for what it is. This is a generational change. Housing has never been a top issue for anybody. Well, not everybody, but not a top issue for most people until just very recently. And so recognize that. So I forgot to animate this slide. I apologize. What success looks like. Like, Chris, okay, stop talking about high-minded stuff. Like, just talk about something crunchy that I can get my hands around. Success looks like rent and sale prices slowing down or holding steady. I don't think that we'll ever really get sale prices to drop or rents to drop, in part because just imagine the screaming that you would hear from landlords and the banking sector, the finance sector, who are basing their projections and their plans around at least this level of price, this price point. And really, we need so many units that I don't think that we can really catch up there. But still, if we're successful in that, that will be a great success because it gives your existing systems more room to breathe. Instead of just life support help from like job training or a voucher for a housing voucher, that turns into life-changing help. Because, what good is job training if the new job that you train for and get still makes like, $60,000, $75,000 a year? You're still going to struggle. It helps, but it's just life support. It's not life-changing. So even that is helpful if we can just hold prices steady for a little while. What that means in closing, I'm sorry, for this slide is 6% rental vacancy rate. That's where rents will hold steady. They won't go up, they won't go down, and 4 to 5 months of home sale supply. Again, prices stay. Final slide, I apologize. unaffordability is an issue for you as a city, and as a resident. As I've talked about before, attracting new talent really hard. Ask any business proprietor or owner how hard it is to hire new people. Other industries are suffering. If you care about untreated homelessness, mental health crises, or drug addiction, those people, those social servants, those social service workers, don't make enough to live either. And it's really hard to get more of them to do that hard work. Public safety as well, logistics, family support, hear about that, on and on and on. The solutions represent an opportunity. Instead of accepting the argument, well, we're giving something up, we're giving up too much for all of these things. Did you know that if you have more housing in your city, your property taxes will go down? You'll have better staff services, less homelessness, and a more vibrant economy. And of course, less road congestion. There's lots of other good that we can realize. And I don't think that we should really discuss changing our housing, our structures as giving something up when we see all of this good in exchange. So sorry, I went on a little long. I blame sickness, but still my apologies. So any questions? I will stick around for as long as you want discussion.
Thank you so much. Questions, Commission?
I think you ought to run for public office. I'm not sure what it is, but
Oh man,
you know how to deliver a message.
do I though? I felt like I didn't do so great tonight. I apologize for that.
I mean,
But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You did a great job. Just unfortunately that the message is not, the message itself is not great, right?
It's a very bad message. I'm still stuck on that one site that had the income levels remaining the same for 20 years or 10% increase over 20 years. That's just phenomenal to me.
It's pretty tough. It's, it is grim. And it's something, I often get pigeonholed as like, oh no, it's Chris, here comes a rain cloud, which I actually kind of enjoy and lean into, but I'm a little rain cloud, short and stuff. This is an opportunity, right? Think about all of the opportunity we realize if people have more, for example, disposable income and they can live closer to work, childcare becomes easier. Think about all the things that get better as we start to address this issue. As much as it is a grim message, it's really just one of, we've just missed the opportunity. But we can still catch it, right? If we take action. And there's a lot of good that can be realized that we'll see very quickly, if we take action.
Okay, other questions? Hearing none. Okay, thank you so much, Chris, for your time and your presentation.
My pleasure. And if you have any questions after the fact or want to talk about this, remember Mill Creek is a member of the Alliance. You're all more than welcome to send me an email. It's at the front and back of my presentation. If you have any questions, thoughts, if you want to see more of the numbers or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. I've got lots more where this came from. So thank you all so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that leads us to briefing discussion. Item D, housing element presentation. Okay, OTAC and Leland.
Yeah, this does not need introduction.
Yep.
It's continuation of our housing elements. So Kara, here you go.
Yeah, Sybil, would you like me to share screen or would you like to do that on your end?
You can share screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And Andrew, I can flip for you, or if you want to lead.
That's fine
first.
if you want to flip for me.
Okay, great. Let me pull that up. While I do that, thank you all for hosting me virtually. I appreciate it. It's lovely to see you all. Here we go. Okay, can everyone see?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So as you might have seen from reviewing the packet, we are on meeting 2 of discussing our housing elements. And the bulk of tonight's agenda is dedicated to Leland, but I'm going to start us off by talking about goals and policies and our review process for that, which includes Planning Commission. And then we'll jump to some reference information, kind of like a cheat sheet that Leland has put together. Hopefully this will help kind of give context to Mill Creek situation more than what Chris just did. Thank you again, Chris, for presenting. And then also if anybody has questions moving forward, you have a good source of information if the general public or staff or things like that have questions. And then we'll walk through some adequate provisions, which we touched on in December, but we've made a little bit of progress on that and we can touch on that. RDI or racially disparate impacts, which LDC did a lot of work on, so we're just going to briefly go over that and a couple of updates. The housing targets, again, we'll revisit those, including the income bands, go through growth scenarios, which we sort of touched on a couple of times, but we've honed in a little bit, if you will, in preparation for our joint meeting, which may or may not be scheduled for February 6th. I think Al can speak to that later. And affordable housing in Snohomish County, that was meant to be Chris's discussion. We flipped things around, so apologies about that. And then, of course, we can always discuss in the middle of everything, so feel free to raise your hand if you have questions, but we have some time at the end for discussion. So, as you all remember, this is our outline, and we're going to start looking at our goals and policies in more detail. So this is kind of the bulk of the plan or the meat, and we're starting off with land use. As you remember, that was our first sort of touch point. So that's the first element that we're working on the goals and policies for. And Sybil and other staff will send those out, I believe, tomorrow. So we've drafted those. City staff have had a chance to review them, and now it's your guys' turn. So OTAC and Leland will be drafting each of the elements. Leland will be working on the housing and economic development elements, and OTAC the rest. And we're working as a team to make sure that everything is cohesive and looks similar, so that as you go through this process, hopefully it's not as daunting as this first one might be. So we'll work on sort of a schedule where we present the goals and policies in a very brief format in sort of our introduction sessions. This would be today's introduction session for land use. And then in the interim between this meeting and the February meeting, you'll have a chance to review the actual goals and policies in a Word document, which I'll pull up in a second. And then hopefully you all will have a chance to provide comments and questions and suggested edits and things like that. So you can see on this slide, hopefully you can see, I'm not sure how big it is on that end, but we have several columns. So we have our 2015 goals and policies, or the new MPP or CPP, so you can see the language that we've borrowed, and then that actual goal or policy language, and then any reason why we might have changed it. So generally it might be an update to accommodate an MPP or a CPP. And MPP, for folks that might not know, is multi-county planning policy. CPP is countywide planning policy, so that's Snohomish County that drafted those. MPPs were drafted by PSRC. And so we're required to be aligned with both of those sets of policies. So we make sure that we check against those. So the other reason that we might change a goal or policy is to be aligned with recent legislation, such as House Bill 1220, House Bill 1181, which is our climate change legislation. Any community input that we've received, we want to make sure that we're being concise. As you'll see when Sybil sends the document, our document is 11 by 17 because some of the goals and policies in the 2015 plan were quite lengthy. And so we're trying to pare those down so that they're a little bit more bite-sized, and staff and planning commission and city council can reference those quickly and have a good idea of what's going on, as opposed to one you can see on the bottom here that's several paragraphs. So we're trying to be a little bit more concise with our language. We also want to reduce redundancy both within one element. So if something is said in one goal or a policy, we don't need to repeat that within that element, nor in different elements. And we'll have an indicator in the final plan of if something is related to another thing to try to reduce that redundancy. And then also one thing that we're doing is making sure that our language is appropriate for what it's being used for. So a goal is very high level, policy is a little bit more specific. And then if you remember in our outline, we also have an implementation and monitoring section. So we'll have some action items that result from these. So some policies that were in the 2015 plan might be a little bit more specific and sort of have a SMART goal attitude to them. So we're going to move those into the action items that the city can pursue to make sure that they're following through on what the comprehensive plan is laying out. So you'll see that in the first column, we've added some numbering because the 2015 plan had a lot of bullet points, and for our tracking purposes and yours, we like to make sure that we're telling you how we're moving things around. So we've added some numbering, and you'll see OTAC-LU1, things like that. So that's where that numbering is coming from. And then, that's the same for this last bullet here. So we made sure that everything is numbered so that we can keep track. And The goals will be in this blue box and highlighted in this bold text. And then the policies that are associated with that goal are nested underneath, as you'll see. So we have LU1 would be the first goal, and then LU-1.1 would be the first policy underneath that goal. So you'll get a better flavor for that when I show the Word document. But while I bring up the Word document, do you folks have any questions?
No, but I have a comment. So one of the ideas it seemed a great waste of the planning commission's time to go through all these in one meeting. We'd have to fly through them. And so the idea is we would give those to you in advance. You'd have time to go through them at your leisure, at your own pace, be thoughtful about what you read. And then you could bring your comments, suggestions, edits back, and then we would review them. And it would be a more of a compressed discussion on land use in that case. So each element, we would do that. And so that would be your homework, and you have roughly about 3 weeks to get through it. So does that seem fair to the commission? Not to, it's pretty dry to go through that stuff in one meeting.
Sure, just for understanding expectations, would you want us to have reviewed and I'm guessing track changes in this document and submit it back before the planning commission meeting so that they could collate it all together? We can just efficiently look at it rather than
Well,
us.
That would be ideal. I know it's a lot to ask. And so if you go through and you're finding, wow, gosh, I have a lot of questions, you might want to do track changes. If you just had a few comments, you could just mark it up, PDF it, and then email it back to Sybil. And then we would get it to OTEC and their team to compile into one big document. So everybody could see whatever, all the comments. So we could just talk about the comments and address the questions and edits and so forth. Like if it's an edit and we think that it's a reasonable edit, it's not in conflict with other things, then we would probably say, yeah, that's totally fine. But if there's different comments on the same one, we'd have to spend a little bit of time just kind of making sure we understand where each commissioner is coming from on those comments. So we're trying to do our best to figure out the easiest way to navigate through that, because that's by far the driest and could take a lot of time. And we're desperately trying to avoid having special meetings in any given month to stay on track, to stay on track. What happened? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you go. To stay on track. So there might be a case in the summertime where, we're trying to catch up and stay on schedule. We might have to, but we would talk about that well in advance.
And I would just add that pay attention to the deadline. So if I send a document out, which would be tomorrow, for example, the deadline for this would be February 8th. It's going to be meaty and a lot of information to digest. So take your time, start early, and make sure you get your comment into me in a timely manner, so we can also read over and have a formulated response into
Right.
the commission.
And housing and land use are going to be the big meatiest ones. The other ones are much, much shorter, except maybe transportation.
Then can I ask, so each one would independently send it back to you? Because if we start with an online document and then it becomes an online meeting.
No, it would be independent.
Independent, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit more work for staff, but to your point, it avoids that problem.
And there's only 7 of you, so I think that's an easy number to digest too.
Well, would there be, in that scenario, would there be a spot or a time when, so these people all make comments, would we come together to see all those comments and say, oh, that's a better idea than the one I had? Or is it just going to be independent input?
No, we would, so at the next meeting, time would be allocated to go through those comments as a group.
Okay, thank you.
And we might not get to every single comment. OTAC and city staff will have to work on the fine details because we'll only have a couple of days before the next packet is due for your review. But I think the goal is to pull out the big ideas or the big questions and the big changes that we see that are mentioned, and then we can talk about those and any other specific questions that folks bring up in the meeting. But the fine grained details, I think you'll have to see in the second draft version.
And I really do like the concept of that first column versus the second column versus the fourth column to reduce the amount of words it's the best idea anybody's ever come up with.
Yes, we like it to be actually usable. So I hope that this will be a little bit
Usable
easier to use
and
moving
readable.
forward. And
Yeah.
readable.
The only thing, maybe I just preemptively request a 1 week reminder before that deadline.
Great. So I'll walk you through a little bit of this while Andrew gets set up. So I've explained, so we've got, first of all, I want to highlight these are draft. So we definitely recommend everybody look through them if you have the time and suggest any changes and provide comments and things like that. And we'll take those into account as we move forward. There might be a couple of versions. So just keep in mind, these are draft. We've provided this comment that explains how track changes work in case folks aren't familiar. But essentially you go to this review tab here, and then there is a tracking button. So you click this and it will highlight itself. And I've provided a screenshot so you see what that looks like. There's also a YouTube link if folks want, it's a 1.5 minutes. It's not very long, but if you want to look and see how it works, that can help out. This is an example of what track changes looks like. So you see the red text that's underlined. Sometimes it's purple or yellow, things like that. And then you'll also see this line over here that explains or that kind of indicates that there's a track change. So we prefer track changes because it allows us to see what's been changed. If you don't use track changes, it's a little bit harder to see if you've changed a word or deleted a row, things like that. So let me know if you have any questions on track changes.
And will the track changes be turned on the document when we get it?
No, you will need to do that on your side.
Okay, because I sort of have trouble. Sometime I turn it on and it doesn't make any markup. So, okay.
Yeah, so I can show, can you all see my screen pretty clearly or should I zoom in a little bit? Okay, so this is an example. So I have track changes off right now. So if I were to type, oh,
You have it on.
shoot, I have it on. There you go. So I'm already a little confused, but so track changes are on. So you can see that it's highlighted in red. It's got that underline. So you can see that it's working. If I turn track changes off, it won't show up in that same way. So that kind of indicates to you whether or not it's on.
I know how it works. I just have trouble.
Oh,
getting
sorry.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you saw me, I did too. So, and I do it every day.
And if anybody have trouble, reach out to me and I will set a time to go over too.
Thanks, Sybil. Yeah. Okay, so we've got, like I was saying, our original 2015 goal or policy over here, our reason for change in the center column, our new goal or policy, a number. And then, as I said, to get the plan certified, we need to make sure that we are aligned with the Vision 2050 MPPs, which are from CSRC, and then Snohomish County is CPPs. So we note that here to make sure that we're covering your bases and you'll get certified. So in this specific first line, we have a goal. It's a combination of two previous goal or policies that were combined, and you can see that's noted in the note here. We've noted that the language has been edited and split. Split meaning moved to two different places. And then we've got our new policy or goal. Similarly, down here, we've combined two different goals or policies in an effort to reduce redundancy and combined everything into one goal or policy. This chunky policy here, we've pared down quite a bit. And then, as I was saying earlier, some language that was in the 2015 plan is not necessarily a goal or policy moving forward. So a lot of that language that was in this goal or this policy 1.11 is now going to be in code or already is in code. And this one you can note is aligned. Ooh, there's a typo. But this is aligned with MPP DP-5 and then CPP DP-35. So we're making sure that we're catching all of those.
Can I ask on that one, like if you go to that long verbose piece under 1.1, it has the whole piece of arterial streets, residential areas, include roadway buffers, consistent with the streetscape element. Now, how do we address that? Or how do we know that that's addressed somewhere else as we shorten that to just encourage, aesthetically pleasing? Because in Mill Creek, I know why that was in there because I was here when we wrote that. It was all about the buffers in there. So I just want to make sure we understand how you want us to use the document.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think if you have a question like that, feel free to add a comment in and ask that question. We can also make sure that it's in code. So I believe that I checked the code to make sure that you have some information about roadway buffers, but I would have to check to make sure that that's correct. So those are good questions to add in comments, and we'll make sure that's what we're hoping that you can kind of catch.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So like Sybil was saying, it's quite a lengthy document. It's 8 pages, but they are 11 by 17 because the original policies were so long. So I encourage you to get started early if you have the time and the energy. Take it in chunks, maybe goal by goal, see how it goes. But I'm happy to answer any other questions if there are any. Great. Okay. I'll pass it over to Andrew. And again, let me know if you have any questions. Look forward to your comments and your thoughts.
It's in here in the PowerPoint.
PDF.
Yeah. Oh, I have to share it.
Oh, Andrew, sorry, I can share my PDF again if you'd like.
That's fine.
Okay.
I can do it here.
Thanks.
And go back to Zoom.
Oh, okay. Oops,
And then-
sorry. Okay, share screen.
Yeah.
Is this one? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Okay, hello everyone, nice to be back. Good to see you all again. So, oh, this is the wrong one actually. That's the supplementary material. This is the right one. So, I'm going to talk about 3, 4, 5 things. Briefly. First of all, the housing background data, which Kara alluded to earlier, adequate provisions, which is looking at the rate of housing production and some new regulations around that from Commerce, racially disparate impacts, and both housing background data and racially disparate impacts. There was a supplementary packet material that you guys received. A little more on the housing targets to address some questions from last time we were here, and some refined growth scenarios. So, as usual, feel free to interrupt anytime. Housing background data, in response to a lot of our conversations and also in an effort to have sort of centralized background appendix to the housing element that kind of sets forth the state of housing and housing affordability in Mill Creek, we've compiled this background information and I just pulled out a few points here for the slides. The rest of it, as you saw, was in your packet. The race and ethnicity here, this is the current here in 2022, and back in 2010, you can see the city's become a lot more diverse, and there's a higher share of Asian populations than regional averages. And this is sort of setting the stage for the racially disparate impacts data and discussion, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Household size is something that we've talked a lot about here in relation to forecasts for population and households, and the way that population and households get translated into one another through this metric of household size. So looking at Mill Creek, your household sizes are pretty similar to Snohomish County, a little bit smaller than the state as a whole. And the latest OFM data shows 2.46 people per household on average in Mill Creek. And so that was a question that someone asked at the last meeting. And we're seeing decreasing household size here and throughout the region in recent years. And so the forecast for 2044 is this will go down a little bit to 2.28. So when we're talking about the 2044 housing targets and population targets, the housing unit target will be multiplied by 2.28 or vice versa to get, between the two. And on the current relationship between them is 2.46. Another thing is just looking at the inventory of housing in Mill Creek right now. On the right, the pie chart shows the distribution of housing units by unit type. So you have 60% single family units, single unit housing units, that's 5,353 units. I put the number on here too for information. Small amount of middle housing, 2 to 9 units, and then you know, between 10 and 20 and more, that's what, like 32%. So about a third of your housing stock in apartments. We looked at the building permit history, and this also will relate to the adequate provisions, which we'll talk about in a few minutes also, just to see the trends of what's been built. There has obviously been a slowdown in construction overall in recent years, although the amount of multifamily construction has, you know, been a higher proportion of all construction in Mill Creek.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
You
of
just said
course, yeah.
apartments under the 20 or more units, but I think we do have some buildings of condos that. would
Oh,
be
yeah,
good.
sorry, yes,
Okay.
you're right. Condos and apartments. Yeah, this is a sort of, this is ownership or rental agnostic, it's just.
Yeah, I just wanted to
The
make.
size of the building itself, yeah. Okay, and this, you know, I probably don't even need to show now because Chris did such a great job of presenting this information, but this is actually the Mill Creek specific data on the similar chart that we saw from Snohomish County. I started this at 2010 with a baseline of 0, and it shows the percentage increase in rent, home prices, and household income since then. So this is similar to what Chris was saying. The incomes have increased. These are not inflation adjusted, so you see there is a bit of an increase there. Although if we were to adjust for inflation, we would see that go down. But the straight incomes have increased about 30% since 2010. Rents about 78%, and housing prices 173%, with a huge uptick, especially since the pandemic. And this is a similar chart, also for Mill Creek specific to what Chris was also presenting. You know, assuming similar metrics of mortgage rates and down payment percentages, looking at how much the median household could afford in Mill Creek and how much housing prices are going for. So this is just sort of reinforcing what we heard from Chris. But I laid it out this way, which has, you know, people have expressed that this is a convenient way to sort of lay this information out, because it takes incomes in the purple columns just in, you know, in chunks of like 50,000, 100,000, et cetera. So you can correlate those incomes with the housing price that household could afford. And it makes it easier to sort of conceptualize, aside from just the median household and the median sales price, what, you know, a variety of income levels of Mill Creek residents could afford. And that kind of also ties back to our previous discussions and Chris's discussion about perpetuans, et cetera. So I'm going to need to go over this more, but the data is in there for you. This is the cost burden data for Mill Creek, again, similar to the stuff Chris was talking about. As you can see, similar to what he mentioned for the countywide, renters in Mill Creek are paying a fair amount more of their income for rent and housing costs than homeowners. That's cost burden. So the purple line here is renters that are paying more than 50% of their income in housing costs, and the green is renters that are paying more than 30% of their income in housing costs. So overall, it's, you know, about 40% or so of renters are paying more than 30% of their income in housing costs, and that's what HUD, you know, considers a definition of being cost burden. So ideally, households should not pay more than 30% of their income in housing costs. And on the bottom, it's the same data on cost burden in the green and purple bars, but this looks at it by household income. So that AMI percentage that we were looking at earlier, you can see as the incomes decrease as you go down, the lowest income households in Mill Creek are paying, you know, almost all of them are paying more than a third or half their income in housing costs. And even as you get up closer to 80% AMI, your judges and et cetera, you're still seeing, you know, a little less than half of households paying, you know, are cost burdened. I also wanted to point out that this chart is by number of households rather than percentage, even though the number of households in each bracket is coincidentally somewhat similar, but just to contrast the percentage above.
And just maybe a confirmation on
Yeah.
a data point here for the 80 to 100% AMI. Just confirming that's back off the 118 number. I remember at some point there was something presented about the average income for Mill Creek residents. I just want to.
Right, yes, thank you for that. And it's always good to clarify this. The AMI is the regional household it's the area median income. So it's adjusted for household size, and it's a set number for the whole county, which is the number which is used to determine housing affordability. So when you have subsidized housing, it's the amount that you can rent for that rent that housing for is determined by the regional AMI. So when you look at the median income here in the previous slide that you're talking about, 118, that's what the average household in Mill Creek earns. But when we're looking at the percentage of AMI, that's for the whole area, that's 146,500 this year. So it's higher than the average household in Mill Creek. It's adjusted for a larger household size. And it's standardized by HUD as a measure of how much you pay for housing, so that it applies countywide. So the difference between those is confusing and tricky. Basically, I like to think of like the 118 here as like your bottom up number. It's just like, what are people in Mill Creek making? They're making around this much money. And the AMI is a top down number. It's like, we need a standard number based on a large sample of people and a large sample of household sizes, so that we can standardize how much people pay for their housing in relation to the region. So that's kind of one way to think about the relationship between them. Does that make sense? And finally, Chris also alluded to this, it's just the latest extract from the PSRC income restricted housing inventory. There had been some questions about how many subsidized units there are in Mill Creek. So I put this on here for your information. These are shown in two ways, on the bottom by bedrooms and on the top by AMI. So again, you know, when HUD says, we'll give you, you know, you can be eligible for a subsidy, tax credit, you know, financing for this project if it will rent at a rent that is affordable to a household earning under 80% AMI. That's of that larger area income standard. Then those are the rents that we're looking at here. So 50 to 80% AMI, 30 to 50% AMI, those are more deeply subsidized units. And 0 to 30% AMI, there's none in Mill Creek. I also split this out by projects built in the past decade and earlier for the purposes of the adequate provisions, which we'll talk about in just a second. Oh, which we'll talk about right now. So we looked at the income band targets in the previous two meetings, and there's a couple of other required elements that were passed into law by HB 1220. This is one of them, and the racially disparate impacts is the other one. This adequate provisions analysis is a little bit confusing in the terminology, but essentially it looks at whether or not the historic production of housing in a city is you know, moving fast enough to achieve the number of units that your target has been set for. So have you been producing enough units in the past, you know, 10, 20 years? If that trend were to continue, would you reach your housing target? And furthermore, would you do it at the various income bands? And if not, then Commerce asks that cities analyze barriers that may exist both in code and development regulations or in you know, availability of land and funding gaps. These are the four categories that might be impeding the progress towards the housing target. So on the right, this is the historic production here from 2013 to 2022 of units at each income band. So using that subsidized housing data we just looked at and market rate housing data that we saw earlier from the permit database, this is approximately how many units per year at each income band. So these are low income, moderate income, and high income units have been built in Mill Creek. And in order to reach the targets, these here on the left is how many would need to be built at each income band. So you're producing a sufficient amount of units in moderate and high incomes, but there's a gap of 37 units per year approximately to meet the target for lower income units. So we've been working with OTAG and staff on this checklist. This is what it looks like. We're working on filling it out now. It's essentially coming down to some small considerations about development standards, and then a lot of emphasis on this land availability question. And of course, as we talked about last time, and we will in a few minutes, it also goes back to the Mill Creek Boulevard sub area, which is of course the opportunity to rezone for more housing down there to meet these targets. And so one thing that in addition to this checklist that's kind of coming out of this is some broad recommendations on zoning standards for that sub area, which are based on what you studied previously in that plan, a little more refined than what you studied in the sub area. I want to mention one more thing about this adequate provisions analysis and the 5-year report card progress report, because there's also been some back and forth about this. This is the statute. Surprisingly, it's pretty straightforward in the way it's written in the law, so you can look it up if you want to read it. But essentially, all jurisdictions will be required to provide this progress report to Commerce 5 years after the comprehensive plan is adopted, which details every city's progress towards the things that HB 1220 asked them to do: accommodate housing at these various income bands, look at these 4 barriers to production up here. And if there's things that were identified during this comp planning process that are needed to meet these housing targets, then Commerce will want to see that those things have been done or are in process. And if not, then there's another process to sort of make a new plan, work plan to adopt those regulations. So that's sort of that's more in the implementation side of the comp plan and monitoring. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's sort of lumped in with the Commerce guidance on adequate provisions, and the things in this table will be things that are referred to in that process. Any questions on that?
So just to confirm what you're saying there, that it's after adoption of the comprehensive plan, we have 5 years to make the zoning regulation changes?
Yeah.
Is that the correct way to interpret that?
Well, there are.
We have to implement any changes that the comprehensive plan has on the zoning code have to be implemented within the first 6 months of 2025. What this is talking about is in 5 years, we have to, during those 5-year span, we need to be tracking how we're doing by, are we providing, is there opportunities to provide additional affordable units? If so, where are they? Now, a lot of that is driven by the market. We
Yeah, of
don't,
course.
we as a city control it to a point where we have to come up with ways to encourage it. What are the, what those are, we haven't figured out yet. But that it's still up to the developers, the nonprofits to produce those units. We're just providing the zones which they could be built in. And so the progress report is how many units are, have been built in year 1, how many in year 2, those kinds of things, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, and if there's other things in the comp plan, barriers to production or whatever that are talked about, they want to see that there's been some progress made towards removing those barriers to housing production. But yes, things like the ADU zoning and middle housing, all that is, they're going to want to see that was also adopted in this 5-year checkpoint. But yeah, that was required to be adopted in the first 6 months of 2025.
So we can build it and get it all ready, but if it doesn't happen within 5 years due to economics or whatever, we're still on the hook. And we're gonna have to change course after 5 years to try to get the train back on the tracks.
Well, it's a complicated question. We as a jurisdiction aren't building anything. We're not developers, we're not housing builders. What we are is, and we don't provide those services. We don't have a fund that where we
Right,
support,
shelters, yeah.
affordable housing. We have to try to come up with incentives that, you know, the nonprofits can use, developers can use, and we have to ensure that there's adequate zoning within the city that those units could be built.
Yeah.
We have no control out of production. So if they can't build it because the cost of land is too high, we can't do anything about that. That's a market condition that's not controlled by any jurisdiction. Unless we control that piece of land, then we could dictate and partner with the developer to get affordable units built. Whereas we put in the land as part of the deal and they build the units. In that scenario, we would control it. But outside of that, we don't control what's built or not built.
And when I said we build it, I didn't mean physically building the stuff, but we build the process to allow them.
We have to have the infrastructure in place
yeah.
and demonstrate to commerce that we've made a reasonable effort to provide, you know, incentives and opportunities for someone to build those units.
Okay.
But it's still up to the market.
Yeah, but jurisdictions are not gonna be held, you know, responsible if the units don't get built for market reasons or whatever. That there's, I mean, and Commerce has really been clear about that, you know, throughout the whole.
Well, yeah, because there's no, how can
There's no way you could, yeah, of
I
course.
can't go to the city of Mill Creek can't go to, you know, a property owner and say, you need to offer your land for less.
Of course, it's about creating the conditions, like you said.
Right.
Okay. So moving on to racially disparate impacts. Now there was this this great report that LDC did some years ago or last year, I guess. And that we reviewed and against the new commerce guidance to address racially disparate impacts, which was part of HB 1220 as well. And this is the commerce framework for how this should be done. I will note that this analysis is a lot more less prescriptive than the income band analysis, which we talked about last time. So there's more flexibility, and most of this work on the code review and policy side was already done by LDC. But there's a couple of things that are sort of ongoing and that we've presented in your packet today. There's ongoing community engagement throughout the planning process, as we know, and that's more to come next year on that. On data analysis, OTAC has created this baseline community profile, which you saw a few months ago. The racial equity and displacement analysis report has some background, but there's some recommended metrics to look at as far as racially disparate impacts and displacement that weren't covered in the background of the LDC report. So we've added the slides that you saw in your packet today to supplement that and to eventually combine those into the background document for this. As Kara mentioned, when we're moving on to goal and policy review here on the various elements, one of the things we'll be reviewing against is these criteria about displacement, the potential displacement, racially disparate impacts, exclusion, et cetera, in policies. And so that'll be integrated throughout the policy review as we go on forward, and then policy revisions here. So that sort of, just to summarize, is where we've been, where you've been, and where we're at now moving forward through the commerce steps of racially disparate impact analysis. And a few things that we pulled out from the data, looking at income by race and ethnicity. There was a lot of data on income and cost burden and tenure in the LDC report, but it wasn't disaggregated by race and ethnicity, so we wanted to just have that documented. In Mill Creek, you can see here at the bottom, about 60% of residents overall are earning over 100% of the AMI. And that's similar for Hispanic and Latino populations. Asian populations here are earning more in general, and Black and African American residents are earning less. And there's some interesting distributions here, but that's the big picture. Looking at tenure as well, there's some disparities there. Probably more striking disparities that about 2/3 of Asian and white households own their housing in Mill Creek, and about 2/3 of Hispanic, Latino, Black, and other non-white races and ethnicities are renters. And that's kind of a compounding thing. There's a lot of correlations between renters and lower incomes and opportunities, as we know. So that's an important metric.
On the chart on the left,
Mhm.
I'm having a hard time understanding it.
Okay.
The numbers that are to the right-hand side of the bars, like on the first one, Asian, 75%. What is 75%?
The key is at the top. So this goes from low income on the left in the dark blue over
Okay.
to high income on the right.
Okay,
Oh, is the screen cut off?
The light blue under the above median
Oh,
doesn't
it's-
show up on your,
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, you're right. Oh, well,
I've got the PDF. up,
okay.
so I can-
Sorry about my color choice. Yeah.
okay, so that makes up, okay, now it adds up to 100.
Yeah,
I didn't
sorry about
understand
that.
what it was.
Graphic design fail on my part. And these maps were from OTAC's background report, just looking at the distribution of race and ethnicity around the city. This is non-Hispanic white population by census block group, concentrated in the center and the north of Mill Creek. And then this is the Asian population, the second largest population by race in the city, as we saw earlier, concentrated here along Seattle Hill Road. And finally, one more map on displacement risk. PSRC has a measure of displacement risk that they've done for the whole 4-county region based on a bunch of factors. Mill Creek scores pretty good in this category as far as low risk of displacement in most of the city. There's some moderate displacement risk here in this area, Martha Lake and over in the UGA, although there's obviously more commercial zoning and less housing in this area. So anyway, those and a bunch of other data points and charts and tables are in that background document for you, and that'll be integrated, like I said, into sort of an appendix for the racially disparate impacts background. Okay, now on to housing targets, everyone's favorite topic. This is nothing new, but there were some, we discussed last time that we were here that the Planning Commission was interested in a little more background on the development of these targets for permanent units and for emergency housing. So I'm not going to read all this text to you, but I just wanted to include in the presentation to note a few key things from the HO5 report that we pulled out. First of all, this is the section on household size, which we already talked about. So the way that this housing unit target was determined was to take those household sizes that I showed earlier and divide the population target by those household sizes. And then there's the Housing Planning for All tool, which is a commerce tool which distributes the resulting housing unit target by income band across the county, by looking at a whole bunch of things which are in this link if you're interested to read it. It actually is pretty interesting, looking at first how much housing would be needed in Snohomish County to eliminate that cost burden that Chris talked about earlier. So there's a lot of cost burden residents. How much housing would be needed at lower incomes or lower rents and housing prices to eliminate that cost burden. Secondly, how much housing will be needed to account for future in-migration during the planning period, and a bunch of other things. How much housing would be needed to house those who are currently unhoused or who are living in overcrowded situations. So they have a whole list of analyses they did to break down the income needs of the county, and then those needs were broken down by city, adjusted here as it says, adjusted based on the existing amount of subsidized units in each jurisdiction. So they looked at how many units there are serving lower income households in Mill Creek, and then what corresponding share of housing units from the countywide need would rebalance that those needs of income levels, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit confusing. There's a lot of numbers. The report is good if you have some spare time and a lot of coffee. It's pretty interesting. PSH is permanent supportive housing.
Thank you.
And then that's dealt with here, and I'm not gonna read this all to you again, but basically, this right-hand column explains this Monte Carlo simulation, which is a statistical model that they also took into account a bunch of different things: disability rate, evictions, incarceration, severe rent burden, unemployment, et cetera, to estimate the countywide need for emergency housing and emergency shelter. And then that total countywide need was allocated to each jurisdiction proportionally. So in this case, Mill Creek is responsible for 1.56 of the total Snohomish County housing unit need. That's the grand total. Your housing unit target is 1.56% of the county, and also 1.56 of the total county target for emergency housing. So that's where all that came from. I
So
just wanted to address that a little
That
more in
is
detail.
that is response to a commissioner's question of on why we have to provide those types of units. And that's our nut. That's what we have to provide. So the planning commissions, go ahead.
We don't have to provide the units, we have to provide.
Zoning.
It's
Those are
zoning
the,
that would
those are the
accommodate
units that were allocated.
Yeah.
In our numbers. We just have to provide the zonings
to allow.
to allow them. There's some additional legislation that talked more about I think it was runaway youth and the services that are provided to those youth, whether their parents give consent or not. And there was concern raised that is not appropriate. While I understand, and I'm saying this for the commission as a whole, while I understand that any one of you may have personal beliefs that may get you to agree or disagree with that, but as a commission, that's not part of your purview. Those are your own personal beliefs. If you strongly believe that some of those services should not be provided, then you need to contact your legislator and get them to get that input to them so they can influence the legislation. What is under your purview is we have to, as a commission and as staff to the commission, have to agree on areas within the city that those facilities could be located. And any reasonable conditions for siting those facilities. Keep in mind that we cannot be so restrictive as to not allow those facilities, because then we are open ourselves up to litigation, which we don't want. And so, could be as a conditional use when these things are met, where they're located, all those things are under the Planning Commission's purview, not the services that are provided by other agencies, because the city does not provide those services, and that's not our business. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear and everybody understands.
Can I ask, so earlier on one of your slides, you showed about 100 units being produced a year in Mill Creek. But this number, 162, that's over the whole duration of the comp plan, right?
Oh,
So
correct.
per year basis, we're,
I also wanted to point out that the 100, where was that one? The 108 units that are needed are for all of 0 to 80% AMI. So that includes, all these non-PSH, permanent, under 30, PSH, 30 to 50, 50 to 80. Actually, this emergency housing is outside of that as well. So this is treated differently. It's not part of the total target. It's only a target because it's in beds, not in
good.
units.
No, thank you for jumping back to that.
So yes, and it's 162 for the whole 20-year planning horizon, correct?
Okay.
So are there any questions on that particular issue? Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So moving on to our final topic, scenarios. The OTAC and Leland team have been working on refining some elements of the scenarios which we presented last month. And here's why. So this is a little history of planning for the sub area. Anyway, so the Mill Creek Boulevard sub area plan, some of you may recall if you were involved in that plan or read it, that that plan explored what the capacity of the sub area would be if 30% or 50% of the sub area was rezoned. That was the framework of that analysis. That was developed with some certain assumptions of building type. It was also developed looking at if 30 or 50% of the sub area were fully built out. So how many units could be accommodated if you rezoned 30% of the sub area and that entire 30% of the sub area were developed. And the same with 50%. It also used a 7-story prototype, and it was developed before the current growth targets that we have now by income band. So that was a sort of preliminary look at, different acreage, different areas in the sub area parcels, and what you could fit on them. Last month, we looked at 3 scenarios exploring targets and redevelopment. We looked at the various prototypes of mixed-use buildings and of some commercial buildings, like we talked about the aspirational office and healthcare uses. And we looked at ADUs and middle housing to comply with requirements of HB 1220 and 1337. And so today, we've updated these scenarios. Rather than taking a percentage and looking at how much we could fit in that percentage, we wanted to look and bring you some information on how much of the sub area would need to be rezoned to meet the new target, which we didn't have when the original sub area plan was done. And there's a bunch of assumptions here that we've incorporated. So as we talked about before, ADUs and middle housing apply to all scenarios because they're required to be implemented in the zoning code within 6 months. We've slightly dialed back the prototype density from last time. So we're looking at a 5 to 7 story mixed use prototype. The sub area plan had like 110 units an acre. This is down to 100 units an acre to reflect the potential for some shorter buildings or just less dense buildings or a little more parking. We've added a couple parcels outside of the sub area here on 16th and the Bethel Everett Highway as potentially redevelopable land. We didn't have these parcels included originally, but staff indicated that there was some interest in including those parcel acreage in what might be redeveloped. And finally, we have maintained and refined, sorry, yeah.
The 132nd, just to make sure,
Yeah.
that's the Lowe's commercial site.
Right behind Lowe's, Muttley Square.
Okay.
If you would recall, it came to planning commission for Biden site plan approval back in 2019, right before COVID.
Oh, Sprouts.
Just
Okay.
confirm, this is
Sprouts, yeah.
the solid Sprouts,
Yeah,
right, right,
so
okay.
Excuse
The,
Yeah.
the mapping is wrong. It should be on the opposite,
Oh, sorry.
side of Sprouts. But
Could you point to that on your,
Because what's up there looks like it's the Sprouts site.
Yeah.
Where should it be? Is that what you're saying?
Are you talking about down here, Sybil,
yeah, that's
across the
Sprouts, you're
street.
right.
or here?
Okay, so across
Like
this,
more out.
Oh, it's down here. Okay.
Yeah.
that was the dog kennel place that never developed.
Yeah.
That's sitting there with lots of piles of wood on it right now, just north of the Les Schwab, I think.
Yes, exactly,
Sorry.
exactly.
Next to the substation.
Yeah,
Mm,
okay.
Between the
Thank you.
substation and
I saw that and thought, what?
Okay, cool.
Makes reasonable sense to include that.
it's a piece of developable, it's
Mhm.
a swamp. I'm sure it's a piece of developable land. Okay.
Okay, so, oops, that's 5 slides ago. Why did that happen? Okay, here we are. So here's the revised scenarios. Scenario 1 hasn't really changed. It's development on vacant, redevelopable, and partially used parcels from the buildable lands, which we talked about before. Assumes the sub area is not rezoned. It assumes development density follows existing trends. So that's the same as it was. Then scenario 2 and scenario 3 The only difference between them now is that we're looking at different parts of the sub area. So in scenario 2, 100% of the sub area is rezoned to allow this prototype we were just talking about, a 5 to 7 story podium mixed use prototype with ground floor commercial. So that equates to about 100 units an acre, 20 jobs per acre in the ground floor commercial. Things like the substation and critical areas obviously excluded. And then we have these other parcels we just talked about, assuming to redevelop potentially something similar to the EGov area. So a little bit less dense than the sub area, or considerably less dense. Residential development outside of the sub area, so in the rest of the city, is the same as in scenario 1. So you've got a small amount of parcels that we looked at that might change. We've got ADUs, metal housing, all the stuff we looked at before. Commercial development outside of the sub area is slightly denser than scenario 1. So this is sort of the area that Justin was talking about earlier, down south of the sub area. You know, we left open the possibility for something like a medical use that would be a little bit denser than the types of daycare and strip commercial that you see there now. And scenario 3 is exactly the same as that, except only 60% of the sub area acreage is rezoned. So what would that look like? It excludes parcels south of 164th. And it excludes, it doesn't exclude any specific other parcels, but you know, it excludes like a percentage of the parcels north of 164th up here, things like the sub area, the substation, maybe other uses that are less likely to redevelop over time. Maybe the part of the strip mall, the Mill Creek Center, but the Panos property. And over here on the right, note all scenarios, 2 ADUs are allowed on single family lots, duplexes are allowed on single family lots, except where prohibited by HOAs, of course. And you know, we have these small assumptions that we had from last time still incorporated. So those are the scenarios that we looked at.
Wait, can you go back?
Yes,
to the scenarios.
Otherwise.
So it's important that you digest these scenarios and give us your impressions on if you're comfortable with that direction or not. Now, these are what OTAC and Leland and staff think that is a pathway to reach our housing targets and our growth targets. And so if we choose to go less than that, there's a reasonable likelihood we won't be able to make those targets. And so whereas Leland had shared before, there was like a 30%, you know, rezone of the sub area or 50%. But when they dug deeper into it and they started applying the densities that we would need to have on that whole area per acre, that's what they came up with. And that is what will be the subject of the Joint Planning Commission Council meeting on February 6th. So, and I'll talk more of that about that at the end. But so that's why it's really important that if you have a strong opinion that that you feel like that's too much or too little or whatever your comments are, we need to know, because we need to be prepared to present what is likely going to come back to the Planning Commission to carry on. Because we need to get consensus, not just from the commission, but we also need to get consensus from the council.
Can I ask, just going back, so
Yeah.
you say status quo, the buildable land report, but what I think I hear you saying, Al, is that at the 50% of the higher density that we had looked at in the Mill Creek study, we're not meeting the target? With
Yes,
the
the
7-story
target is-
buildings
yes,
and
the-
50% rezoned.
Well, there's several moving parts, but yes, essentially because the target is now higher, the target is now higher because of the requirement to plan for more lower income units. The target needs to be met with a zone that allows a certain level of density. So the revision to the target has made that 50% not enough, first of all, and secondly, Commerce requests or requires or suggests that you can't count the 100% full build out as your capacity, because there has to be some small reduction in your acreage that is available for redevelopment over the planning horizon for a bunch of reasons. One is which there may be, physical impediments like wetlands, as we know around here. There are also maybe, infrastructure needs, like right of way that needs to be constructed, or other stormwater facilities need to be constructed that could take space away from where you can build housing. And finally, the likelihood that everything could redevelop in 20 years, is there's always going to be somebody that doesn't want to sell their property, as I was saying earlier, and the city has no control over that. So we had to allow for a small but reasonable market deduction and infrastructure deduction within the commerce guidance. So that decreased the total acreage slightly. And finally, I think what we heard from the commission last time was that they were interested, you were interested in leaving some option to not need everything to all be 7 stories. That there's some opportunity for 5- and 6-story buildings. So decreasing the density slightly gives more options for what you want to allow and the types of buildings that you might see.
And that's where it gets into, at a high level, that's what Andrew's explaining. At the micro level, that's where we'll be back with the commission when we're talking about the zoning that supports the comp plan. And where are those ups and downs? Is there opportunities for townhomes in some of these parcels that are maybe smaller and aren't really suitable for commercial,
To middle housing you're talking about.
yeah, something like that, but other types of housing.
Yeah.
And it's not dissimilar that, in the development world, you may look at 10 deals, but only one gets into feasibility, right? So you have to look at a lot. It's the same principle. We have to look at a larger area because realistically, you're not going to get 100% redevelopment in 20 years. You're going to get somewhere, I don't know what the number ends up being, but you have to we have to demonstrate to commerce that there's a reasonable chance that the area that we've rezoned can meet our housing targets in the planning horizon. Obviously, 20 years is a time horizon that nobody can predict.
Yeah, of course.
Let alone, 6 months, a year, 2 years, right? Because anything can happen economically that could influence how that redevelops, right?
I thought other people.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple slides on the results of the scenarios. So just to drive the point home that Al was saying here, in the no action scenario, the status quo, you've got capacity for 600 units and no new units in the sub area. So obviously a huge gap between the target. When you rezone 100% of the sub area, if you take all of that acreage, that your capacity for housing exceeds the target by about 1,500 units. With rezoning 60% of the sub area, you basically reach the target. So that is to say, in order to meet the requirements, 60% of the sub area would need to be rezoned, but you may want to rezone 100% of the sub area for reasons we'll talk about in 1 second. On the jobs front, just to quickly put that to bed, the numbers look pretty much the same. The amount of potential employment square footage generated by rezoning the sub area is more than sufficient to meet the target in both scenarios. So the city may wish to consider rezoning the entire sub area. Why? Okay, you only need to rezone city 60%, but there's a case to be made for rezoning the whole sub area. And these are some considerations we wanted to bring forward to you for your thoughts, like Al was saying, and feedback going forward between now and February 6th. As we've talked about today several times, fluctuations in the market, of course, are a major determinant. There's, property owners who, when we went back and looked at the interviews that were conducted for the sub-area plan, a wide range of, ideas about how long people thought that their investments would last if they would want to redevelop. Although I would note that when I went and read those interview notes again, the property owners that we did talk to were supportive of rezoning, even those like Panos who thought that it might take quite a while for their properties to redevelop, said, well, that's fine, because then I have more options in the future. If the market picks up, in which, as we said, anything can happen in 20 years, and you have only rezoned a portion of it, then you are creating scarcity. So if things start to happen, development picks up in the area, there's pressure to redevelop, that may inflate land prices on the remaining parcels, thus making it less likely that they could redevelop into housing. Rezoning only certain parcels may create a weird lopsided development and prevent logical parcel assembly. So there may be some situations when someone wants to assemble parcels. Who knows what might happen in the long run, but if you haven't rezoned the whole sub area, that may become impossible. Also, like the town center was done all at once, but it was done in an organized way so that you have this nice street and things on either side that make it more walkable and pleasant place to be. Now's the time because we're doing the comp plan, so it's a good time to change zoning. And of course, needless to reiterate again, it's very unlikely that the whole sub area would redevelop in the 20-year planning horizon, even if it were all rezoned, particularly in the areas with very thriving businesses. So those are some considerations for, although you don't by statute, I suppose, need to rezone the whole thing, why it might make sense to do it. And I put a footnote here about the planned action EIS. It's not something that's going on as part of this comp plan, but it is a potential tool that some cities have used to encourage a certain level of development in an area. Basically, it's an environmental impact statement that looks at getting projects pre-approved for an EIS before, so that each project doesn't have to apply individually to do an EIS for their project. But you can cap them at a certain number of units. So we've seen this happen elsewhere, like in some station areas in Shoreline where we're also working. They, not trying to equate this to a Shoreline station area for the record. I'm just saying that it's a tool, right? So they had a certain area and they wanted to see a certain number of units. So they did the planned action EIS for that number of units. Not that someone couldn't develop beyond that, but it's much more complicated for a developer to do an EIS rather than with the city's already done it for them. So there are other tools and considerations for the future. I just wanted to sort of put that thought out there right now too.
I would just say, having been involved in it for many years, part of the reason that was picked for the 60% and was the thought of, the town center was built as one development. Would that happen? And where was the most opportunity? You look at along, and then the most environmental benefit, because it was driven both by, hey, we know we need more housing, but the other side of that coin was, can we do things to improve North Creek? And so that was part of the focus on, hey, why do we pick this area? And it was both a more deep dive into a specific vision for the city, as well as understanding that the comp plan was going to come along and look at this more generic piece of it. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily to say, hey, this is the only way to go. But at the time it was, as a commission and as a council, I think they were looking at it and going, yes, that's where most of our oldest tilt-up buildings were. That's where most of our stormwater management, because during that whole thing was a whole look at, it actually started off with, would we do centralized, would the city support in a planned EIS stormwater management along there? And that would be our benefit to these property owners that you would do. So I mean, those are just some of the history out for you. So you go, hey, the council, it's not just this way, but it was, how do we present that without having the horrible, last time we did anything like that with moving the city, administration building, it became half the council got unelected. And so there was a lot of fear about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when we did the Mill Creek sub area plan, it was, well, let's pick something that's somewhat innocuous, impacting as few property owners as possible, show what could be done, and get a feel from the community of what that vision was.
Yeah, and my understanding of some of that history too is that, at that time, you're kind of embarking on groundbreaking in terms of creating a town center. And there was a lot of skepticism in the public that it was even going to happen. And it has happened. And so now you're looking at a totally different set of economic conditions. We have different things that are happening to the city and to the region. And so I think that it's it's worthwhile to open up that discussion because we as a jurisdiction are not going to be able to make our targets if we don't really strongly consider
No, and
the sub area. We
as you
just can't,
mentioned-
there's no pathway to get there, as we be frank.
yeah, I remember Mr. Panos talking about it and stuff, but it drives a community vision for that area. It makes us look at the roadway system. How do we
Mhm.
want to have
Yep.
it?
Absolutely.
And I think, yeah, it's got to be well presented to council is all I'm saying, because they will. But I don't think as a group that looked at that and came up with that being sitting there when we said, well, 30%, it was more a political reality of not wanting to blow the thing up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and a study of what could be, like you said, absolutely, yeah. Why, I don't know why it keeps going back to that same slide every time I click the button. So, I don't know, is there more to talk about this on this now?
No, I think,
we
I think
need
that
to
that's
work with
good.
staff
I
and think
think
about the best way to present this.
we've
on
already,
February.
we're beyond our time
Yes,
by a
yes.
bit and I want to respect everybody's time, but are there any questions on these scenarios that, because this is what we're going to be presenting at the joint council planning commission meeting in February.
And just to refresh my go back to the one that has a sub area on it,
Oh, the
please.
sub area, yeah. Mhm.
Just to refresh my memory. So everything in well, that is the sub area there. And we did our 30% look at it. We were on the west side of Mill Creek Boulevard, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it was these. From here on down to the pond. Yeah. Plus or minus.
I guess maybe I'll ask the skeptical question. If our goal or our requirement is that we only need to provide the opportunity to create housing, if our plan numbers meet it by the 60%, why would I commit to more? I know you're getting here, but like if my understanding of the way you represented before information of, we don't actually build it ourselves.
Right.
Right, so I've 60%, the numbers pencil out. Why build more? I'm just trying to think of what the council might ask.
Well, yeah, that's a fair question.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I guess I'll jump into, since we're kind of coming down to the end. So we've had discussions with a company called Main Street. Main Street was founded by Eric Campbell and Kelly Price, who Eric started Cam West, which was a prominent developer on the east side for housing. And he sold the company to Toll Brothers, and that's how Toll Brothers established their office in Kirkland. He left after he did that. He started Main Street to focus on, more podium type construction, apartments. They've worked with Bothell, they've worked with Woodinville to create the buildings that are there. They developed some of them. And they are coming in at that meeting to talk about the benefits of these types of projects. What do they give to the city? What can the city do to help support these kind of projects from actually happening? It's an opportunity for the council members that are concerned that going above 3 stories is not consistent with Mill Creek today. But we have to be thinking about tomorrow. And so they're the experts that are going to come in. Andrew's going to talk about the scenarios and what they mean. I would say that if you say 60%, now what if only 30% that is actually developed? And then you're not really meeting your targets. So the idea is that you would rezone everything because one, as a developer, as a property owner, I have a higher zone, a higher density. My property has more value now, right? And so there's a higher likelihood that they may exercise conditions in leases, that oftentimes those long-term leases have development clauses that allow the developer to break the lease for redevelopment. And so maybe they exercise those options to create, the sell to developer or partner, develop it themselves. But it makes sense to do it 100%, not just 60%, because what happens to the other parcels? They may come back and say, well, why didn't you include us? Why just those? How did you decide that it's just those people? And so it's probably easier, and Andrew's right, now's the time. And I think Main Street's gonna tell you that you have an opportunity as a city to create a place, to create something. And if you choose not to do that, that train's gonna leave the station and you're not gonna be able to catch it. And then you won't be able to get that redevelopment to happen. And so you'll have underutilized parcels. And the whole idea is try to create opportunities to redevelop. Yes, it could be the city could engage in going after grants to do more storm drainage to take some of that away. A planned action is a way to take that SEPA requirement out of the equation. And so what that means is that the entire area has a maximum build out. And so as parcels redevelop, you're ticking, it's like a checkbook. You're taking units away from there, but you've already done your analysis on what the impacts are. You have there's probably transportation elements on capacity. Do we need to build a new road? Maybe the city takes that on to build a new spine road in between somehow. I don't know. But by the city doing those, they're providing some of the groundwork that takes some of the uncertainty away from development. And if you can take some of those uncertainty away, you have a higher likelihood that the developer is going to come in and pull the trigger and do it. Because time is a killer of projects.
I mean, there's a lot of levels too. I think one of the things that, like, this is reminding me of all the stuff that Chris talked about too. Like one other reason to do it is because there's a housing crisis. I don't know how compelling of a reason that is to every person on the Planning Commission Council, but nonetheless, it's an important consideration. You know, like the 60% is what the state wants the city to meet. But you know, there's also an opportunity to provide units at a variety of affordability levels, you know, for a multitude of members of the community, and also you know, sort of extend it. And I think from a placemaking perspective, there's an argument to be made as well for sort of logically extending what's been, I think, a great success in the community at the town center of Southward in a homogeneous way. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to come at that question, but we did want to your point, to have that 60% there because of the way that the previous study was set up, and like you said, Commissioner Nolan, the various political considerations and everything. You know, I think it's important to at least be able to say, well, here's how the previous look at this area fits in with the new framework of housing targets and requirements, and here's what really needs to be done, and then, you know, go from there.
So this is Alan. Do you guys hear me now?
Yes.
So in the sub area location, there's a lot of corporate and municipal buildings there. Can they be, what are you going to do about that if you do 100% redevelopment?
Well, that's the whole point, is that you have to take into account that some of those properties might not redevelop in the 20-year horizon.
That's right. So, but what's
the
what's the process you guys are going to use? It's really difficult, at least for me personally, even though I like the idea of the 100% redevelopment, to ascertain whether it's viable or not, unless you guys know up front that some of these difficult areas to be redeveloped, will they allow for redevelopment? So you just don't know. It's sort of up in the air.
Right. Well, it is. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think that you know, the likelihood that the post office would go away and become housing is obviously very, very small.
Tenuous.
But there's also not a reason why the fact that it's a post office means that it doesn't make sense to rezone it, because what if the post office did consolidate and move somewhere else? I mean, we've seen post offices redevelop in the region elsewhere, you know.
But but it also depends on, is the post office a renter or owner of the land?
That too.
Don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah, and just I just think that it's difficult for me personally to assess these scenarios unless I know some of the details about our capability to actually develop in those locations. And in the sub area, since there are so many corporate buildings there and there's so many governmental buildings there, I just don't know.
I think one thing we had talked about too is maybe chatting to a couple property owners again, following up with the conversations that were done during the sub area plan to try to get some on the ground detail about that type of thing as well.
I mean, is it just me or do other individuals on the commission feel the same way?
I believe the federal government does own the property under the post office. That was a consideration during the planning. The city property outside of political considerations was one that, you know, that was put out there for that reason. Look, would the city look at these two properties? Is there something different the city wanted to do? And so I think the city over the next 20 years may look at that, you know, depending on where the council's at and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
but
so-
isn't it also reasonable to assume that if you rezone, let's say, it includes fish and wildlife, it includes the post office, those properties have a higher value now.
Mhm.
What if the federal government said, hey, gosh,
I'm
we could
not-
sell those and relocate to a different location, and that could occur.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing against that. I'm saying, you know, the public-private partnership on that or anything else. I'm just saying it gets back to that. How did for a limited study with a limited amount of money, we pick a spot? And, you know, this overall area is still part of the sub area. And so, you know, I think overall there was consensus. How big a bite could the city take at that point in a very gross study, knowing that it would come along to the comp plan? And so that this is where we're getting the further refinement. And yeah, I'm not opposed to this presentation to council. I'm fascinated to see what they come back and tell us and what guidance they provide.
But I don't think anybody can predict which parcels will break free
No.
in what time frame.
No, of course not. And that's. I
But
think,
nothing will happen if the zoning change stays the same.
And is there anything that city wants to drive through zoning
Mhm.
that would be, if Mr. Panos developed all of his and the 60%, you know, we met our target, but nobody else developed, would that be bad for the city? And I don't, you know, I don't think that we're saying it would be bad or it would cause traffic congestion or it would screw up the rapid ride or anything else. So, you know, it's a relatively compact area to redevelop. I mean, I think different members of our council will probably have differing opinions on which they'd like to see redeveloped first or how, but I'm fascinated to see if my guess is, you know, consistent with where they land when we present this.
Hey, Alan, this is Dave Hamilton. From my standpoint, I think we have to look at this at, 20 years from now, put the zoning in place. I don't think it's really our concern where City Hall moves. We're looking at a land use issue and that will have to be, if the land use changes in the comp plan, everybody will have to live with it. That's sort of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I
And-
mean, my concern is the feasibility of meeting the statements that Al made. And that is that we want to make sure that we have appropriate housing, but if we're if we start the process at a dead end, because there's so many governmental limitations on the developable land, I mean, are we just cutting our own throats?
Well, I think that, you know, the capacity question is an important question. I mean, there's maybe a very cynical approach, which would be, you know, you can meet the target by rezoning things you are sure are not going to redevelop. I mean, I don't think that this is going that far. I mean, it's an area that's already been identified, been studied, property owners have been talked to. Yes, and surely there are a lot of governmental uses and there are a lot of wetlands as well and undevelopable land and places that people don't want to see redeveloped. But I think that as when you take the sub area as a whole, especially knowing that you know, to meet that, you know, maybe if say 40% of the uses in the sub area are things like the substation and the post office, then that still does leave you more opportunity in the rest of that area for housing to occur. And I think also compared to other options in the city, as Al said earlier, there's not other options that exist to the degree and the density needed to provide that housing as much as in the sub area, even with those restrictions that you talked about, you know, the governmental buildings and the corporate buildings. There's still more potential here than anywhere else.
It's our only potential site
Mhm.
to scratch our itch. And
I honestly think I'm fascinated by this across from the Sprouts property because transportation access is difficult at best at that location, wetland issues. You know, the city hasn't studied that much.
Mhm.
So I'm fascinated to see what council thinks about that, but we have a lot of information on this area. At least we haven't been presented with much on how that would redevelop and what will council think about that as a higher density use in that area.
I understand the concern. It's just that I can't tell you with any certainty if any of those parcels are redeveloped. I've gotten calls from some that own from the brokers that represent some of the owners, and they're very interested to see what's gonna happen. Now, are they sellers today? Probably not, but they might be tomorrow. And so, you know, there's been at least two so it's probably, there's at least 4 acres there. Probably, roughly. So I think that there's interest, but if you don't take the steps to lay the foundation to rezone it, because even if you rezone it, it doesn't mean that it's not going to push anybody out. If Fish and Wildlife doesn't own their building and they're renting and the owner wants to capitalize on the new value of their property, they're going to do it.
Okay. Well, great discussion. We will take all this into consideration with the way that we present this to the council, try to be as efficient and clear as possible. And I don't know if you had anything else to add, Kara, on these next steps here. I think we talked mostly about all this, the progression of introducing elements and goals and policies.
Yeah, I think August is the 1 month that as you get into June, July, we'll probably have to have a discussion on are we going to be able to have a meeting in August? Because that may mean that one of the previous months, we probably need to have 2 meetings. Because I know that August is a big vacation month and, you know, it's something that we just need to be aware of, staff to commission on how we can stay on schedule.
Anything from your end, Kara?
No, I think just for the next steps, it sounds like February 6th is a go, Al, for the joint meeting. We'll see you all there. And then in our February Planning Commission meeting, we'll go over the comments on land use, goals and policies, and then Andrew will sort of bring up economic development questions and a discussion on that and move forward from there. So then in March, we'll bring another set of goals and policies for your review. And then you can see the rest in the presentation.
so Al, will February 6th be at 5 o'clock?
Mike and I have to sit down with Martin and Laurel and the mayor pro tem and kind of figure it out. Because right now it's just within the meeting, and I'm not quite sure how. We haven't set everything up in terms of the actual agenda for that meeting, for that piece of it, and so that's going to happen probably next week.
Okay.
So there'll be more to come.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
so that gets us through our briefings and discussions. So Al, Sibel, anything for the good of the order?
We have crime data that was requested. Unfortunately, it's raw data for 5 years, and we as staff don't have time to dig into it, break it down, and try to show if there's more or less crime associated with multifamily. We just don't have the capacity to do it. We're happy to provide all the data to the commission. If they want to dig into it, that'd be perfectly fine.
And that's consistent with the direction and the agreement we had with you, which is you have to manage the city staff time, and you can't go on, explorations for each of us as we have pet areas. And so, no, I thank you for grabbing the data. And I think you're staying consistent. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, there's one more thing. This will be my last planning commission meeting. I'm gonna be stepping down, effective the 30th. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. And, I've been working with Justin and Sybil to prepare them to carry the baton farther. There'll be more to come, probably from Mike Todd on an interim. He may reach back out to Clay White to see if he could help us out, at least with the comp plan, to provide some of the extra guidance for a few months while they conduct the search. I've told Mike that I'm happy to help him evaluate candidates if he thought that would be useful. So, and I've told Sybil and Justin I'm available to, give them advice if they have questions as they're navigating through the process right now.
Oh, well, on behalf of myself and the commission, sorry to see you leaving. But yes, wish you luck in your new endeavors. We'll have to hear more about
Thank you.
that. Anything else?
We were just getting you trained,
Or me training you.
whatever. Okay.
Anything? So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You can't. So you're gonna be gone before our February 6th meeting with council?